As President Trump's approval numbers rise to their highest level since he assumed office, 47% in the latest Washington Post ABC News poll, the Trump economy appears to be firing on all cylinders. We're seeing simultaneous high growth, low unemployment, rising wages, negligible inflation, and soaring consumer and business confidence reflected in that rising tide sweeping from Main Street to Wall Street. Earlier in the show, we asked Brent Bozell the question, just how bad is media bias? And now we welcome in Liberty Nation's own economics correspondent, Andrew Moran. Welcome, Andrew, with a mirror image of the question I asked Brent Bozell. Andrew, just how good is this economy?
Well, when Trump ran for president, he said that the nation would be tired of winning, and I think Bill Maher summed up when he said that he's tired of winning, hates how Trump is doing so well. So I think when you look at the metrics, the main metrics, GDP, unemployment, job creation, they're doing exceptionally well. Now, I'm not a fan of GDP calculations, but it's impressive how much higher it is than during the 8 years of the Obama administration. But there's one thing that most people don't look at when it comes to the jobs numbers, and that's when you compare full-time employment to part-time employment. Throughout the Obama's tenure, I always wrote that the United States was turning into a part-time jobs nation or a 1099 economy, even when the economy was expanding. But under Trump, it's been a complete flip. The part-time jobs, admittedly, they're still at historic highs compared to 20 years ago, but they've been coming dramatically down under Trump. And then on the other end, full-time employment has been skyrocketing. So the Trumponomics is doing quite well. I mean, there's some things that I'm reserved about, but overall, it's been night and day compared to the last 8 years, or compared to the 8 years of President Obama.
Well, just to drill down a touch on something you said there about the Obama economy and how it was a part-time economy, wasn't it also, and we saw this in the push to raise the minimum wage to $15, wasn't the Obama economy also in many ways a minimum wage economy?
Yeah, that's true. A lot of jobs were service sector jobs. A lot of people worked in fast food. So that's another huge issue. But now when you have states who are raising minimum wage, people can't even get the minimum wage jobs because they're going extinct. If you look at New York City, they have a $15 minimum wage, and all those restaurant jobs are worse than what happened following the September 11th terrorist attacks. So people can't even get minimum wage jobs because the states are raising them. And then, of course, with wages now at $28, people are doing so well that they can get those $28 positions because of the corporate tax cuts.
Now, one number which may be most critical in the upcoming presidential election, since it benefits those states in the heartland that Trump stole from the Democrats in 2016, is the 500,000 manufacturing jobs created since Trump took office after a loss of 200,000 manufacturing jobs under Barack Obama, who openly declared that those jobs aren't coming back. What's been the key to this resurgence in the manufacturing sector?
I think two things: the tax cuts and the deregulation push by the Trump administration under Obama, and of course previous administrations. The manufacturing sector, they were pummeled into submission by all the regulations, and then of course you had the higher tax rates, and then other countries had more favorable business settings than compared to what the United States had with manufacturing. Now, of course, manufacturing numbers, they're not as great as they were at the height of American manufacturing, where the middle class personification was based on everyone went to a facility, they had their steel buckets with their sandwich and milk, and they were operating heavy machinery. Those jobs, I mean, they really aren't coming back necessarily, but it's not because of Trump. It's because, or China even, it's because of automation. There's a lot of automations going on in manufacturing, and that's why U.S. manufacturing output is so high, because a lot of manufacturing companies, they're investing in technology and automation. And so the U.S. is still a huge powerhouse when it comes to manufacturing, but not just so much when it comes to jobs.
Our guest is Andrew Moran, LibertyNation.com economics correspondent, who's gaining increasing recognition across the internet for his well-stated economic brilliance. Now, Andrew, the Federal Reserve raised rates last year. Wall Street slowed down for a time. Trump tried to shout down the Fed, and then the Fed took their foot off the gas. Who was right, the Fed or Trump?
Well, if you've been paying attention to my writing on LM, then you know I'm not a fan at all of the Federal Reserve. I don't think it is an independent institution as media keeps claiming.
Understood. Yeah, understood.
And I don't like the way Trump has changed his mind on the issue. I love Trump before his candidacy and when he was a candidate because he was so blunt on the Federal Reserve. He complained about low interest rates. He denounced quantitative easing. He didn't like how the Fed was doing the bidding of Obama, whether it was under Ben Bernanke or Janet Yellen. But since, of course, coming to office, he's changed his mind, as if Trump was met by Mephistopheles and was promised astronomical economic growth if he suddenly reversed his position and said, I want low rates now. So if you're like me, a huge Fed critic, then you just want to grab some popcorn and watch Trump and Jerome Powell slug it out. I mean, I don't like low interest rates, but I enjoy the Federal Reserve getting what's coming to him. As if Trump is a boxer and he's coming in defeating this evil central banker and giving him black eyes left, right, and center. So I'm enjoying myself. It's entertaining.
Glad you're being entertained. I'm sure the president will be pleased to hear that.
But when it comes to the red tape, his plan, I think, was getting rid of 2 federal regulations for every new one. That was superb. Now, it would be great if he scrapped the regulations altogether, but it's better than expanding the regulation by the thousands. I mean, I think the last number I read when Obama's final year, he said, I think he added about 1,200 new regulations. I mean, that's
I believe, Andrew, that while Trump said he would commit to removing 2 regulations for every new one, I think the actual ratio has been more like 10-1. He's gotten rid of more like 10 regulations for every new one. Now, when Stephen Moore joined us here on the show a while back, and he's one of the architects of the tax reform bill of 2018, when he joined us on the show, and I've heard Larry Kudlow, Trump's chief economic advisor, also an architect of that tax reform bill, I've heard him say this too. He said the effects of last year's tax reform bill have been greater than they even imagined. Do you agree with them? And is it, as I surmise, the corporate side of tax reform that's made the big difference in this current spate of economic prosperity?
Yeah, I agree with both Mr. Moore and Mr. Kudlow. Corporate America has responded kindly to the tax reform bill. No matter how much big business gets slammed every election cycle, it's answered back and it showed its gratitude. Corporations, they've raised their own minimum wages, they've increased their benefits, they've invested in workplace training. Even Wall Street has done all this. One great thing that should please the left is that they're offering parental leave and adoption support, which is a huge thing for the left, and something that even Trump and his daughter have talked an awful lot about, where they wanted to mandate parental leave, but businesses are doing voluntarily, so that's a great thing. It just shows that when you give businesses money back, it won't just hoard it, as many critics say.
Right.
It will reinvest the money into operations. Some will point, especially Democrats, they'll point to stock buyback. But there's a lot of misconception about this process. It's just a way of signaling that there really aren't any growth opportunities on the horizon, which can be both good news and bad news for the Trump economy, because on one hand, there may not be growth in business, but on the other, it might limit the damage of a recession because it preserves capital and it maintains the share prices, which are at record highs. One thing I do want to mention, though, about the tax reform bill, no matter how much we're praising it, there's one thing he didn't do, or the GOP, is that cut spending. It's great to cut taxes, but it needs to also be complemented with across-the-board spending cuts, which he and the GOP have not taken seriously. I mean, fiscal conservatism has been abandoned.
Now, when Stephen Moore joined us here on the show a while back, and he's one of the architects of the tax reform bill of 2018, when he joined us on the show, and I've heard Larry Kudlow, Trump's chief economic advisor, also an architect of that tax reform bill, I've heard him say this too. He said the effects of last year's tax reform bill have been greater than they even imagined. Do you agree with them? And is it, as I surmise, the corporate side of tax reform that's made the big difference in this current spate of economic prosperity?
Yeah, I agree with both Mr. Moore and Mr. Kudlow. Corporate America has responded kindly to the tax reform bill. No matter how much big business gets slammed every election cycle, it's answered back and it showed its gratitude. Corporations, they've raised their own minimum wages, they've increased their benefits, they've invested in workplace training. Even Wall Street has done all this. The rest of the world, they're not really doing too well because they're embracing all this monetary easing and all this big government and tax hikes there and tax hikes there, no spending cuts. So the rest of the world, I mean, like Canada, it's a lost cause, but the United States, they're the beacon of prosperity, and it's doing very well under President Trump. It's probably going to do well a few more years until probably a Democrat gets in power, and they're going to reverse everything that's been accomplished over the last 3-4 years. But for now, we should just have the good times roll, like the baby 37 jump in the streets wearing a diaper and drinking champagne. Let the good times roll.
Always finishing with a flourish, as he often does, is Andrew Moran. And I would say, Andrew, that it seems like the new normal, the new reality in recent decades in Europe, which they seem to have accepted, is chronic low growth and chronic high unemployment. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
If I might say, that was a better ending than mine.
I appreciate that. Andrew Moran, economics correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back talking liberty.